Howdy guys, today we've got a nice little independent project from one of my clients. He wants a couple of these company heroes, this ancient here and this champion here, painted up in the Scythes of the Emperor scheme. I already did a Gravis captain for him in that scheme. It was a really fun project for me. He really liked the result, so he wanted some more, and so here we are. Oh, yes, this is actually... Yes! Yes, this actually comes with standard infantry transfers. Please and thank you. I don't get many of these. I have a lot of the vehicle transfer sheets, but not for actual infantry. That's a lot of Ultramarines. That's going to help. Now, this sheet is very nice to have in my collection, but it doesn't help me with these Scythes of the Emperor. However, that's okay. Thankfully, I have this sheet that I ordered all the way from Germany just for this Scythes of the Emperor project. This was originally ordered for that Gravis captain that I mentioned, and they worked out pretty well. The only thing about them is they don't have the actual decals themselves. It covers the whole sheet. It's not conformed to the shape, so you gotta, clip a little closer around them, as I found out, but not that big of a deal, especially if you know how to use your microsol and microset. But these larger scythes here are the perfect size for capes on infantry. I've only got one left, so I'm gonna have to possibly get a little creative here, but that's okay. Thankfully, only one of the two guys that we're working on today has a cape on him. If I have to do more, then I might have to order another one of these sheets or get really creative, start freehanding. But there's plenty of the shoulder pad size and the kind of the burnt orange, which really does still read as yellow, and they actually have a little bit of a transition on them. You can't see it super well on camera, but there is a color gradient there, and so we've got lots of these to play with. So we've got that. Right now, we're just going to get to assembling. Y'all know the drill here. I trim out all the pieces for each of the two heroes that we're doing today, making sure to pick out specific parts that the client wants, like the Ancient's bare head, and I sort them separately in the project tray. After we have all the parts trimmed out, I have to clean them up using my hobby knife and sanding tools. Next, I bring the project tray over to the airbrushing hood and start assembling. Nothing too crazy here, but for the bare head, I stick it on a painting handle so I can paint it more easily and attach it later as a sub-assembly. I got zealous with parts of this project and completed steps before I remembered to document them. But in the case of my basing method, y'all are probably pretty familiar. I cover the bases in watered down PVA glue, sparsely sprinkle some small pebbles around the base, and then dunk them in my tub of sandy dirt. After that, I seal it all up with liquid superglue. Easy. Same as with the bases, I forgot to document my process for priming the minis in black, base coating them in coal black, and then airbrushing the yellow on their bodies and power packs. Lucky for you, I'm a dum-dum and missed some spots, so I'll take this opportunity to show you how I did the yellow. For any sections that are going to be yellow, I first airbrush with white to give a bright undercoat. The yellow I use here is Uriel yellow, and it's a little warmer than something like Flash Gets yellow. After I add the white, I put Doomfire magenta through the airbrush and spray this into all the shadow areas. When I finally spray the Uriel yellow, it pops brightly over the white and creates a wonderfully dark, saturated orange in the shadows. Once you have the base coats down, you can add highlights of Uriel yellow or a mix of Uriel and some ice yellow. Now that we've completed our yellow and oversprayed it onto all of our black, we gotta clean it up a bit. I'm going to base coat all the black parts in coal black for a uniform color and finish, and this will cover up all the yellow overspray. Here is how the black armor looked once I was done with it. Black armor has been one of several banes in my hobby painting career. I really struggle to make it look good, and it bothers me to the point that I sometimes go above and beyond trying to learn and get better at it. I will say that this project yielded some of my best black armor to date. Part of my success was due to ironing out which colors work best for a neutral black palette. I have Flameon miniatures to thank for identifying this palette, though I had to make my own adjustments in the end. It starts out with coal black, then works its way up through dark neutral gray, and bright neutral gray. The Scale 75 graphite is nice to have as a pre-mixed intermediate color, but you can just mix neutral and bright gray if you have to. We start off with neutral gray, using it to block in our brightest highlights. Don't be afraid to paint a little chunky here. I found out that bolder highlights tend to read better on the mini, and you can always rein them in a little with darker colors in later steps. Like any blending process, there's going to be some push and pull. With that step done, you can already start to see what we're going for. The next step is going to be the dark neutral gray, and we're going to paint this in bands on either side of our first highlights. We also apply this in areas where we see softer bounce lights, like on the inside of the leg. It's just a big cylinder, really. Keep them about the same width, but make sure your highlights don't start going too wide with this step. We want to keep our transition areas tight. If you use dark neutral gray on your mini, and it looks darker than it does here, that's okay. I attempted to mix it myself before actually getting a bottle of that color, and my mix was a little brighter than it should have been. With that step done, you can really start to see the vision becoming clear, and now we have to start blending. On my palette, I mix a watered down glaze of coal black, and we'll use this for the first step of blending the dark neutral gray into the coal black base coat. After wicking off excess moisture into a paper towel, I glaze over the line between the black and dark neutral gray, blending the transition area to where it no longer looks like stripes of separate colors. This technique requires a lot of patience, so if you struggle to slow down with a more tedious process like this, don't feel bad, because I'm right there with you. The next blending step is blending the dark neutral gray and the neutral gray, so mix these two on your palette and water it down to a glaze like before, and apply it on those separating lines. You can see that this step starts to make the reflected light look softer and a lot more natural. It took me a long time to figure this last part out, but what my eyes were really wanting was some sharp, selective spectral highlights in the brightest part of each highlight to simulate that extra bit of shine. For this, I sparingly highlighted a mix of neutral and bright neutral gray in the areas where I already had neutral gray, at the points where the most light would reflect. Lastly, I would put nothing more than a single dot of bright neutral gray at the absolute pinnacle of any surface's highlight. You can see this gave that last little gleam to the model that it needed to look shiny. If you get to this point and your highlights are looking more gray than black armor, then just go and add black back in. Glaze it in if you have to. You can also airbrush and adjust the darkness of your black again, reining those highlights back in, and you can make them tighter and reestablish that black as the dominant color so it reads as black. I don't claim to be an expert on this method, but I'm pretty happy with the end result and look forward to doing even better in the future. For all the black cloth, we're going to stay pretty simple with a soft, diffuse highlight of Eshin Gray. Cloth usually isn't nearly as reflective as armor, like what we just did, so the highlights typically don't go as sharp or as high in brightness. The bear head was another part of the mini that I forgot to document, but just because I like y'all, I went and replicated the process on a separate head so you can see what I did for the skin and eyes. Here you can see the colors I used, starting with a base coat of Bugman's Glow, going up to tanned flesh, then a layer of Kislev flesh, and for the maximum highlight, I sparingly applied a mixture of Kislev flesh and pale yellow. You could try using flayed one flesh for this last step if you don't feel like mixing. The Bugman's Glow just needs a solid coat, pretty straightforward, and the tan flesh is going to be a generous highlight layer that covers the Bugman in all but the most recessed areas. Caucasian skin is a pretty low contrast color with a few deep shadows, but with a decent bit of color depth. Next is Kislev, still generous but not completely covering the tanned flesh, and keeping more to the most prominent or upward facing features. Lastly, our brightest flesh color is just going on the most prominent and outward standing features to help the eye perceive detail even at a distance. For the eyes, this is a matter of trusting your sharpest brush as well as trial and error. Here we start by coating the entire sculpted eyeball in pure titanium white. I usually aim for the black pupils of the eyes, taking up anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of the total space where I originally applied the white. If you goof up, just white over and try again. We also gotta make sure we get this ancient service studs, and then move on to his graying hair. For the ancient's hair, I started out with the general base coat of dark neutral gray over the black primer. After that, I highlight with neutral gray. I hit what sculpted clumps of hair that I can, but the reality is that miniature hair at this scale is really low resolution, and so where the sculpt doesn't provide texture, we're going to have to paint it ourselves. I establish a striped, scratchy highlight of neutral gray that rings around the crown of the head. This helps the illusion of hair strand texture, and helps the eye better perceive the shape of the skull and the volume of the hair overall. Lastly is a more sparse highlight of bright neutral gray, and I use this to fully capitalize on the sculpted fringes of his hairline, such as his Superman locks in the front, and add very striped highlights to further define the highlight haloing the crown of his head. Yet another step I forgot to record was the yellow eye lenses on the champion's helmet. The client specifically requested yellow lenses, which I was skeptical about at first, but after figuring out the colors, I was really happy with it. Apply a layer of scragged brown to the lower front edge and front corner of the lenses, leaving as much of the black base coat showing as possible. Next, do a smaller highlight of phalanx or flash gets yellow towards the front corner of the lens and staying on the area where you put the scragged brown. Lastly, do your white dot highlight in the upper back corner, opposite the colors, and you're done. Now for the Ancient's banner. There is a lot of detail on this thing, so after airbrushing some Eshin gray from the top to highlight the folds of the cloth itself, I had to look at the box art to see what colors went where and what I needed to change for this particular chapter. One obvious difference is the chapter symbol in the center, so I compare it with my Scythes decal sheet to see which size would fit best. For the other details, we have gold trim and details, steel details, laurels, white stars and skulls, purity seals, bright primary colors reminiscent of medieval knighthood banners, and lots of parchment. Since there's just so much parchment, I decided to start with those details by applying a base coat of Rakarth flesh. After a solid base coat is applied, I highlight all the parchment with pallid witch flesh. I apply this to the edges, upward facing sections, and the edges of the folds on the front. For the larger areas, I paint the highlights more broadly across the raised sections of the parchment. After the parchment, I base all the gold in scale 75 decayed metal, then highlight with Pro Acryl's rich gold. I keep the rich gold mostly to the upward facing surfaces, edges, and any sections where I want dynamic highlights, such as on the raised folds of the banner's gold trim. For any steel areas, such as the banner pole and the crux encircling where the chapter symbol is going to go, I base coat in Iron Hand steel and highlight with a medium steel color, such as Ironbreaker. After this, we're moving into the rest of the non-metallic details, including the white skulls and stars, the laurel, and the wax seals. I base coat all of these in bright neutral gray. Starting with the purity seals, I apply a contrast of Sigvold burgundy. For the skulls and stars, I apply volumetric highlights of titanium white. For the knightly fields on the lower left portion of the banner, I eventually decided to use red in addition to the white and yellow that we've been using for this scheme so far. For the yellows, I base coated in Averland Sunset, highlighted in Uriel Yellow, then blended the two with Balor Brown. For the red, I base coated with Mephiston Red, then highlighted with Bold Pyrrol Red from Pro Acryl. For the laurel, I gave it a contrast coat of Carandrous Green. While I was messing with contrast paints, I went ahead and applied Flesh Terror's Red to the ropes of the Ancient's cloak, working around the arms and banner pole to get every part. With all of our colors on the banner done, I now return to the parchment to apply tiny script. I will be thinning down Garriak's Sewer Contrast with water until I get a dilution that isn't too dark, but also doesn't flow due to too much water. It takes some adjustments, but I get the dilution right after testing on my finger. I use one of my sharpest brushes, carefully loaded with just enough paint, to neatly scribble little lines on the parchment. On sections where I had the room, I even drew little scythe symbols to personalize the text just that much more. On the scroll work of the banner, there isn't really enough for the size of the Emperor name, so after some brainstorming, the client and I came up with Xenomortis, which I think perfectly suits the Scythe's struggle against the Tyranids on their homeworld of Sotha. I make sure Sotha itself is referenced on the leg scroll as well. With the banner almost done, I do an edge highlight of neutral gray on the Ancient's gun casing, any armor edges that could use a little more definition, ribbing in the joints, and the edges of the banner itself. Returning to the champion, now with his gold helm, we are going to tackle his power sword. I've already base coated the blade in Stegodon Scale Green. We're going to blend our way up from Stegodon Scale to dark turquoise, and all the way up to titanium white highlights. We're going to add these on our palette and pre-mix the intermediate colors to make blending easier and more time efficient. Starting with chunky highlights of dark turquoise, I roughly divide each half of the blade into thirds, each half having opposing highlights in a sort of A-B pattern. With the chunky highlights applied, we use our pre-mixed intermediate color to blend this dark turquoise into the base coat. As you'll see in a minute, it might be better to chunk out all the highlight areas first to make sure you have the size and placement of the color zones correct before you start blending. Wow, what a cuck song, Jesus. Yeah, we don't do cuck shit on GaussSpellStudios. From here, I add the turquoise highlight section next, blending them afterwards, and then adding the white highlight sections. Here you can see that I went too small for how few of highlights I did along the length of the blade. The white section just looks too thin. So I correct by painting the white further out and feeling my way through expanding and repositioning the rest of the color sections. As I said earlier, blending is often a push and pull ordeal and requires patience. After renegotiating the areas and blends for each color, I seal the deal by edge highlighting the entire blade in pure white. This helps marry the colors together better in the eyes of the viewer. This blade isn't bad, but I look forward to doing even better in the future. Next up are all the leather details, which I will base coat in Rhinox hide, and then highlight up to scrag brown with dark flesh as a midtone. That dark flesh goes on as a volumetric highlight for the cylinders and the folds of the holster. The scrag brown is reserved for edge highlights and thin scratches to make the leather appear worn and used. I make sure my paint is thinned and I use lots of light, quick strokes to build up texture. With the majority of the painting done, it's time to take care of those decals. Identify all the areas where decals are needed, identify the decals that will fit those spaces best, then start to trim the desired decals out using my hobby knife. I have to cut more closely to the shape of each decal on the size of the Emperor sheet. As I cut each decal out, I place them on the damp paper towel that I use for cleaning my brushes. I do have to dig back through my decals box for one of those infantry transfer sheets I mentioned earlier, so that we have some black skulls for the knees on these guys. The next step is to break out our micro set, and we're going to apply this over any sections of the minis that will be receiving decals. Once that's applied, we'll slide the transfers slightly across their paper to make sure they're ready to go and easier to handle. I use tweezers to hold the paper, and a hobby knife to pull the decal off the paper and onto the desired surface. I use either tool to push and pull each decal into place, adding more microset if it starts drying out, and once it's in a perfect position, I press directly down on the decal with a makeup wedge. I repeat this with all the decals. You can see that the knee skull on the Ancient gave me quite a bit of trouble with the parchment and the cape in the way. Now that each decal is placed, we have to further conform them to their surfaces with microsol. This step is especially important if you're placing decals that are going on highly rounded or irregular surfaces. We brush the microsol onto each decal, making sure we don't brush so hard that we move or tear the decal, and then press down with a makeup sponge just like before to soak up the excess. After the microsol and microset, I apply a varnish with my airbrush to mask the glossy surface of the decals and blend them into the semi-matte finish of the rest of the mini. At this point, it is also time to attach the Ancient's head. I remove it from its painting handle, apply a dab of plastic cement to the neck hole, then use tweezers to place the head and adjust the position. The plastic cement will melt through any paint and make sure that head still has a firm plastic-to-plastic bond. Last but not least, we are going to knock out the basing with one step. I recently acquired some of this weathering liquid from Huge Miniatures, and I am in love with this stuff. Huge Miniatures has been putting out some really neat hobby products lately, and I find myself trying out their stuff more and more. This weathering liquid is an enamel wash, so make sure you aren't using one of your good brushes, that you have some good ventilation like my airbrushing could, and be sure to have some mineral spirits handy for cleaning. I take this weathering liquid and just slop it all over the bases. If you get some on the minis, that will just make it look like it's been walking through its environment. One coat of this Mars Dust weathering liquid over a black base coat gives a perfect, dusty Martian terrain look with an ultra matte finish. With the liquid applied, we let it dry, and our heroes are complete. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you found some or all of this video helpful. Making long-form video content like this isn't easy for me to do when my focus is completing commissioned projects, but people always seem to love it. Even now that I paint as a full-time professional, I'm still learning and growing as a miniature painter, and I think it's important for people to see that even the pros need to be lifelong students. I've had a lot of fun painting Scythes of the Emperor lately, my client has loved the results, and you can hardly ask for more than that. I've got another video in the works that is going to feature our biggest Scythes of the Emperor unit yet. Like, subscribe to catch future videos, and leave a comment about any questions or video ideas that you have. Thank you again for sticking around to the end. I'll see y'all in the next one.